Hey, this is Phil and Cole. We're excited to do a live session for you today. Hey, Cole, how's it going?
Doing
We
great.
think we are live. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to talk through a couple things today, set the context, and then jump in as fast as we can. We only have 30 minutes today, so we're going to go pretty fast. Try to give everyone a chance to play with some of these new and exciting tools that are in the space. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Nicole, make sure that you're seeing the right screen. You should be seeing 5 ways to help programmers.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing.
That's what you're seeing. Okay, cool. So back in 2023, so about a year ago, I went to Cole and said, "Hey, there's a conference coming up. Why don't we do a talk together and focus on all the exciting ways that Gen AI is impacting the statistical programming and the pharmaceutical space?" And so we got together and we wrote a paper. I'll put it in the chat box. It's called AI Exploration and Innovation for the Clinical Data Scientist. This was presented at the Fuse conference, I think back in February, March timeframe. And you can find the paper here, and I'll put this in the chat so everybody can get to it. And what we did is we, in this paper, broke down all of the tools that people were using at that time for helping to aid programmers. And there's a lot of interest right now in how can we support programmers, especially coming from commercial software, and aid them in the transition over to open source, especially R, using Python and tools like that. And so that was the perspective of the paper. But we decided as we were writing it that there was two new and exciting areas that we jumped on. One was the idea of, can you use local models in addition to the public LLMs? And then also, if you do that, or even if you build and have access to other public models, how do you have an interface into that? And so we have some sections in here around creating shiny interfaces as well as Streamlit interfaces for doing that. And so over the course of 4 or 5 months this year, Cole and I gave a couple different talks about these topics. And what they kept transitioning over into was the power of Shiny for interfacing into LLMs. And so, Cole, I know this was something that felt like we've seen a lot with groups that we work with people in the public. There was also Joe Chang's talk at the Posit conference a couple weeks ago. Winston spoke about this. So why don't you take the attendees through this diagram that you wrote and explain this a bit?
Yeah, this is my crazy brainchild. But the thing that I thought was really interesting is that OpenAI and ChatGPT went like crazy viral to the point that people who know nothing about software and technology and statistics were talking about it. And I think the thing that they really nailed was this little triangle that I developed here. It wasn't just that they created a cool model, it's the bottom right corner. Um, they did create a cool model, right? They've made a lot of good progress there. But the thing that they really nailed is they created an interface that people could build on top of, and that's the top of the triangle, right? So they created an open API interface that folks can build against when they're building their own software tools. And so that's consistent, it's structured. It's useful if I wanted to build some app that used this model. And so that I think is part of what made them enormously successful. Is that, and I've done this before, is like you build a tool that uses their model through that open API interface. And if they improve the model, all I do is like click a button and my tool gets better. I don't have to do any rework. So that extensibility and that platform kind of structure was really big. But then the other thing that they really nailed, and this was part of the virality of it, was the user experience. This chat app where you could like talk to the model and be like, wow, this thing's really smart. Um, that was, I think, really innovative. And it was what kind of made the power of the model click for everyone. And so these three things all kind of work together really nicely. And this is kind of the worldview that we think about a lot when we think about data products, that you want to think about how your users are interacting with what you've built. A lot of times they don't care, how you built the model or how you tuned it. They want to have an interface that makes sense and provides value to them. But then the other thing is to build these interfaces so that you don't have to rebuild your UX every time the model changes. And so that's kind of the API interface and more kind of structured interactions. So anyways, all three of these go into a good data science ecosystem, in our opinion.
And I think so. What Cole and I did as the talks evolved, we focused on the landscape for Gen AI and the open source ecosystem, and then we migrated that over into a hands-on workshop. And then the last talk that we gave in June was how do you use the tools that are on my screen for building Shiny applications. And so we made videos of almost all of these. And so we're going to leave that to you. And if there's some time today in our 30-minute session here today, we'll try to show you how to get up and running with some of these. But what we want to focus on today is this UI space. How do we create custom interfaces into LLMs, into models? And so there's a lot of great ways to do this. There's Shiny for R that's been around for many, many years. It's really changed the game, and it's really having an awesome impact on the pharmaceutical space. If you've seen Teal or other tools like that, it's really, really great. There's also interfacing oftentimes here with Python. And so you can use an R package called Reticulate to interface and help with the interoperability of Python and R working together. But what's exciting and what we want to talk to you today is Shiny for Python. And so Shiny for Python came out, I think we released it about a year or two ago at our conference. And so what we want to talk about today is how do you get up and running, creating a Shiny for Python application? And how do you do that, especially in this realm of LLMs and interfacing with custom LLMs? Maybe it's your own backend that you've built using cloud and LLMs. Maybe you have local models that you're wanting to interface. Regardless what it is, Shiny is a great UI experience. And you can do that both in R and in Python. And that's what we're going to look at for today. And so, Cole, why don't we transition over to your repository and show them how they can get up and running with it and play with it today using some of the new tools that are at their disposal.
Awesome. That
Yeah.
sounds good.
Awesome. I'll turn off my screen share. And while you're talking, I'm going to update the links in the chat. So,
Cool. Yeah, somebody asked if the slides can be shared.
yep, I'm going to put those in the chat.
Perfect. Alrighty, can y'all see my screen? Look
I
good
can see
there?
it. Looks great.
Perfect. All right, so the GitHub repo that we want to start with, which in order to do the hands-on part of this workshop, again, 30 minutes is a pretty quick turnaround. You are going to need a GitHub account. So the URL is github.com/my name Cole Arendt. Sorry for the last name is a little different, but /shiny-chat. And there's two examples here that we'll get started on, but as most of you probably know, that you need a place to work. And that's a kind of pernicious problem with demos and workshops and stuff like that. And so what we're using today is code spaces. So you see this button here at the top of the repo, open in GitHub code spaces. If you click on that, it will use your GitHub account and say, hey, do you want to open this in a code space? I've already done this, so I have a code space that I can resume. You probably will have to just create a new one. The default settings are perfect. And this is a GitHub product that there's a free tier, and then I'm sure there's paid, stuff too. But basically the idea is it allows you to use VS Code directly in your browser. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to resume the code space. It's actually loaded right over here, but I'm just going to reopen it. And you should see something very much like this when you get there. Yours is going to take a little bit longer, unfortunately, because again, I had the foresight of doing this. It takes like 3 to 4 minutes, and basically what happens is GitHub allocates you a URL. It'll look something like this, right? Some prefix of names with some gobbledygook. And this is your private interaction environment. There is some shared stuff that you can do. And then what it's going to do is it's going to provision you a place where you're running this environment. It's going to clone the repository and all of its code. It's also going to do some work for you on installing the Python packages that we're using, as well as the VS Code extensions. So if you're not familiar with VS Code, there's plenty to learn here. But we added some Python extensions, the Shiny extensions, which are fairly new, and then we also added a something to provision the Python packages. So it should take just a few minutes. I don't
Think
really have any method of feedback to know if anybody's, running into trouble or not.
Yeah, let me use my instincts here. So maybe give everyone a minute or two, especially if they're logging into GitHub or if they're new to GitHub. Um, so a couple of quick questions and things to point out here, Cole. So VS Code is this extensible IDE, and probably a lot of people on today are used to either using some type of commercial IDE or RStudio. Um, Maybe explain a little bit why are we using this for Shiny for Python?
Yes. Um, so VS Code is a IDE written by Microsoft. Um, there is a licensed version of it from Microsoft, and then there's an open source version. And so VS Code is a really great IDE. It's good for Python. It's common in the Python ecosystem. Um, and so that's kind of the primary reason. Our studio does have a bunch of Python features, but it is definitely not a Python first kind of ecosystem. But the other thing is that VS Code is a something that can be built on top of. And so that's where you have all of these extensions. So to answer the question there in the chat.
Yeah.
You can install extensions if you want. There's actually some cool features inside of GitHub where you can install a bunch of uh, like your default extensions for your user and stuff like that. But kind of VS Code is sort of bare without extensions, and so you add all these extensions. And that's something that Posit we're working towards is trying to make an IDE that has all of the goodness of VS Code without, the kind of DIY, you have to build your own IDE from it. And so that's Positron. So I don't know if you wanted to chat about that a little bit, Phil.
Yeah, no, I think the key thing is that I feel like when I go into our studio is kind of what I need it to be. And when I go into VS Code, I kind of need to make it what I want it to be. We're working on that with Positron. It's a new IDE by our studio. So I do think probably going forward, there'll be an IDE like this that we'll use. And I'll put that in the chat box as well. Currently, this is supported on the desktop version. And so this will be a very similar experience, but built from the perspective of VS Code is mainly for software development and software engineers. We're taking that and building this for data scientists so that they can have that multilingual experience. But Cole, I think if you go back, I think the key thing to say here is, yeah, we do need to install some of these extensions, right? Because I don't think those come out of the box. So are these the ones that people will need to install for today's
They
session?
should be installed by default. This is
Oh,
actually
really? Okay.
this is a fun little nerdy bit. So there's a dev container here in the repository. And so it installs these extensions by default. It also has this little UV feature that installs your Python packages for you. So again, it'll take a few minutes, but it should install everything with the exception of this one, which doesn't install because it's not released yet. It's in a pre-release stage, and so that's why that one's not automatically installed. So if you want to install that one, you can. This is a tool for publishing R and Python applications to
So cool.
Posit.
We're going to publish the Python app today. They'll need this for the cloud publishing, right?
It's actually not needed for cloud. Yeah, we'll
No
walk through that.
way. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
They won't use that little push button that we've used.
Yeah, I'll talk through it here in a
Oh
few.
yeah, yeah. You showed me this last night. Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
I've got one
Cool.
other question for you. You've made changes to the GitHub repo, and I want to pick those up. Maybe show people in case they.
Yeah, it should be so if you go to the GitHub repo, there's a couple of things you can do. So one is and the recent changes I added, you can see an hour ago. I added this dashboard folder. That came from Posit Dev and it was Py Shiny templates, I think.
That's right.
Um and so if you're trying to get into Shiny for Python or you're curious and you want to explore, this repo is a good one. It has a ton of examples that you can explore and poke around and learn from. And so all we did was we took one of these and I shoved it into the repo just so that we could have a single code space that does everything. And so yeah, so to do that, to get that latest thing, you can either reopen from the Shiny chat, or you can use the source control pane here. And there's a poll somewhere. I'm not super familiar with VS Codes. There we go. Poll should pull the latest changes. Um, cool. So
Awesome.
hopefully everybody has got things up. Um, so yeah, so we'll dive in here into the dashboard folder. And if you open up app-core, this is core Shiny for Python. I'll explain in a minute the difference between core and express, but it's if you're familiar with Shiny in the R ecosystem, basically it's very similar. You have the UI and then you have the server. Um, the syntax is going to be a little bit different because it's Python, but then you run the app at the end with the app and the UI and the server from it. And so this application, if you run it, is you should have the little run button if you have the extension installed. If you run it, you'll see the application in your browser here in the UI, and you can interact with it, which is kind of fun. Although I might ought to open it up into a new window so that you can see the.
And I think the key thing here, Cole, is that we're trying to show before we get into a Shiny app that's interfacing with LLMs, we thought it'd be good for you to understand that Shiny for Python is a Python package, and it's available for creating Shiny applications with pure Python code. But what's nice is if you're an R developer or somebody coming to Shiny for Python and you're new to it, the layout of the code and the way that the UI and server elements are there is very similar. And so this is a good example for you to kind of break down and build that mental model of like, oh, this is what this looks like in Python versus R. Or if I'm new and I'm just coming to the Shiny for Python piece, hopefully you will be able to see how this is laid out, especially if you have a background in Python.
Yes, well said. Sorry, I'm responding to a question here. But yes, and really the key thing we believe at Posit is that ultimately code is a great way to build interfaces because you can package it up and reuse little bits. And so you'll see that there's a bunch of components that we're using here from the Shiny ecosystem to create this display. And so yeah, so this is a simple example. The Express Python script is basically the same thing. It's just a different syntax. And so this is common in a bunch of other programming languages, but the idea is to try to make a little bit more scoped functionality. And so Express is just a slightly different way of expressing a Shiny application that's meant to be a little bit less like a nested list of lists and more, hey, here's the sidebar, here's a layout column, here's some more layout columns and some cards, right? So you can kind of build little pieces and then reuse it.
And
So again, you can play with this, right? You run the app Express, and you'll see more or less the same thing, same application, different code that built it, same idea. But the key here is giving users an interface, whether they know programming or not. I find these things really useful. I can program, but it's still like you can just see the data, which is great. So the idea is to build a good interface. And we're going to go from that into the LLM world. Is there anything you wanted to share before we did that, Bill?
yeah, no, I think there's probably a couple different components here. We're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I put Shiny Live in the chat box so you can play with Shiny for Python there. What we're doing here is more traditional, as like I'm going to go build an app and I want to develop it and probably put it on a server or deploy it somewhere. Shiny for Live is a great place for you to experience Shiny for Python, where you can actually play with the code. Yeah, exactly. And you can actually write the Python code here. So it's not a nice simplified UI for you to actually experience this live. And then you can also use Shiny Live to build your own applications. And this has been something that's been quite popular in pharma. There was a submission pilot done to the FDA where they're incorporating things like WebAssembly and WebR and Shiny Live into that because this is a serverless way to create and share applications. What we're going to focus on in the VS Code is more of the server-based development model where we're actually going to create a Shiny for Python application with the purpose of deploying that onto a machine that's going to serve that out to the world. So, all right, Cole. Now, yeah, over to you. And I think let's go ahead and transition over to the UI piece.
Yes. So the other thing, and this is where we wanted to, yeah, transition into the LLM world. Um, the the interface that everybody's familiar with is the chat interface, and so that's what we're gonna do. And this is again one of the huge benefits of code, right? I'm totally just stealing a package that one of my teammates built, Winston Chang, if y'all know. The not Winston Chang. What's his last name?
Joe Chang or Winston? Yeah.
It's Winston, but what's his last name? His last name's escaping me. I got Joe Chang. It is Chang. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Winston. Yeah.
Um, cool. So yeah, so this chat stream package is a user interface for building um, a chat application. And so this is what everybody's used to. And the idea is you can do it yourself. And what you have to do is you just have to wire up a backend. And so that's the piece here. You might be like, wow, can we really do something meaningful in 20 lines of code? And yes, you can. But we need something else first. And the first thing here is that we need an OpenAI URL. And so let me share the line of code you need to generate that. I'm not really good at the for only for 15 minutes this will work. But I imagine I'm a really good salesperson and I can like speak really fast and make you want to buy things. So you should run this line of code if you're walking along with us, run on the terminal. Basically, the idea is, remember we talked about that little triangle. There's an API that you can talk to with our user interface we're about to build, and that has a model behind it. It has Open API behind it, or Open AI behind it, ChatGPT. But I removed all the authentication. I'm paying for your API requests for the next 15 minutes. And so if you do that, you should get a little .env file here. That's going to get loaded up, and we're going to use this magic URL to use ChatGPT. So let me get this guy started. Although I think I need to kill this guy. My run button's not happy with me. You'll see this? Click, 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 doing nothing. All right, let's refresh. So the idea is once you have that .env file, and then you go to run your Shiny application, you should get a chat interface with your model. And remember, I made the choices about where the API is, where the model is, what model we're using. I made all those choices for you. But the whole idea here is you're in control of the interface. And so if you were doing this in your organization, right, you could swap out what model is being used. You could swap out what, where the API is, if it's hosted inside your organization or if it's hosted outside your organization. And this is not happy with me, which is always exciting. Can always kill things with a demo. Here we go. So I got it. I just got no CSS. Um, so you
It's
can see the
working okay
model is
for
working.
yeah.
I just don't have any CSS loaded. So it's not as pretty as it should be. That's amazing. It was working fantastically earlier. But you can see I'm interacting here. I'm talking to a model. Who are you? Are you ChatGPT? Lies. It really is ChatGPT, I promise. So yeah, so this is the idea, right? I wrote code. It pulled in this package that builds a chat interface with a model. Where is that model? It's an API. That API is an API that I'm hosting that has ChatGPT behind it. So if you want to do this after the next 15 minutes, you can go into the README of this repo, and it talks about setting up a direction, like talk directly to OpenAI and their hosting of the model. In order to do that, you have to have an API key and an account and all that shenanigans. So anyway, so that's the case for this. But this is still only in my local development environment. I can use this thing, but nobody else can. And so what we wanted to show you also is how to deploy this thing so that anybody can use it. So yeah, Phil, anything before we do
Yeah, no,
football
I
talk?
think the idea here is that you're at a pharma and you have built some really cool stuff on the back end. Maybe you're using tools at AWS, or you have your own vector database, or maybe you have a local model, or extensions of Anthropic, or maybe you're using ChatGPT, and you want to do what ChatGPT did. You want to do what OpenAI did. You want to build a simple interface for employees at your company to use and to use the power that you have on the back end. And so Shiny for Python is a great interface and tool to do that. And so what we want to show you today is without much sophistication, you can build an interface into these backends that you have inside your company, behind your firewall, or in your partnerships or relationships with these larger Gen AI companies. It's working perfect for me, Cole. Just want to mention, but I do think there's some questions about, hey, I'd like to play with this. There's some app.py changes, or there's some requirements text changes. Maybe just take two steps back and show people like the changes that you showed me. So
Yeah, yeah. I think it looked like I don't think my chat messages get sent to everybody. So this is what you have to run to get the .env file with the magic URL that'll work for a limited time only. And then yeah, Joe shared the GitHub repo, which is awesome. And then yeah, so it should be the requirements.txt here has everything in it. I did hack against chat stream, so you're using my copy of it. But anyways, yeah, so I think that should hopefully be good for everybody. I know we're running short on time. I wanted to show everybody, what's the URL? Is it connect.posit.cloud? Yeah, here we go. So this is an alpha product that Posit is creating, but it's super fun. It's great for deploying, especially Python apps are really magical right now. And so this is something that we're gonna play with for sharing this with the world.
I, Cole, I think the main idea here that I want to point out is the Echo Open AI URL. That's something that inside of the code space, they go into the terminal and they just run that command. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couple questions. And when you do that, that's going to make it so that you can interact with the OpenAI piece, correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And basically this is just it's my little API that handles authentication to the model. So that y'all don't have to use an API key for this
And so
feature.
for people on today, the idea is that we're using CodeSpace so that you can develop a Shiny for Python app and go through the motion of seeing what it's like to work with the code and configurations and things like that. But this is right now local to your development environment. It's only available to you as a developer. And so the idea here is like, I have some really cool stuff and I want to share this with my colleagues or others. How do I do that? And so we're going to show you a way to do that that's pretty fresh. It just got launched. So
Yeah.
Paul, over to you.
Yeah, yeah. So if you go to connect.posit.cloud, the login that you have to go through, and there is a little bit of a login dance. So if you haven't been before, you will have to go through that. And that but you have to go through GitHub. So again, you're using your GitHub account. And the reason that we do that is because um, when you publish, and so this is what I was saying, we don't necessarily need the publish extension. We can publish directly from Connect Cloud. And what you do is you go in here, you say, hey, I want to deploy a Shiny application, and then you choose your repository. And so you can see I can deploy all the different kind of entry point files inside of the repository. And so I want to deploy my chat application, and you can choose, your version of Python, all that jazz. I'm also going to set my OpenAI URL here with my magic URL. And Phil, that was the wrong echo command. We want the one with the HTTPS in it. Um,
So one thing I want to point out is I just put the link to the publishing tool that we're going to use in the chat box. So if you'd like to try it out, the quickest way, since we've got about 8 minutes to play with this, is to use your GitHub credentials so you can log in with the GitHub credentials. That's right, Cole.
yep.
And then I think this is really sinking cool. So once you've got that page, all you have to do is just point it to Cole's repository, make sure it's pointed to the main branch and the app.py file, and then set the configurable variable so that that OpenAI underscore URL that we set in the terminal, we're going to set it here in this interface. And then Cole, without much, go ahead and kick it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we click publish, and now we're sharing this out with the world. And I really love how stinking fast this thing is. Um, Anybody who has sat around and watching like dplyr compile before will just like absolutely love how fast this is, because it's done already. Which is insane. And so now this is a URL that anybody can use. And my little friend, the um, the chatbot is now
So
out
why
here,
don't you,
and I
why don't
think I can. I'm gonna sanity check this before I share it with everybody. So if I go to an incognito window, right here it is.
That's
Right.
so cool. Why don't
Bam.
you try see how it does in creating a Shiny for Python app?
What do you mean?
Add right there, just say, can you please create a Shiny for
Oh
Python app?
yes.
Yeah.
So I will confess I played with this earlier today, and it struggled. It kept creating Streamlit apps and Dash apps. Yeah, see, it wants Dash. But
Ah.
if it makes you feel any better, I also found some other funny things. Um, and oh wow, it got it. Good job. But check this out. It's not very confident though. It was convinced it was Saturday the last time I was talking to it. Um,
So I think this connects back to beginning where at the very beginning of the workshop, we showed 5 different ways to create Shiny apps with GenAI. One of those, and probably the most popular one, is Copilot. And I'll put a link in the chat box at how to set that up inside of our studio. Originally, we were going to show that, but it's pretty straightforward. You just go into the global options, you can enable it, and then you have a GenAI programming assistant right inside of the RStudio environment. There's another tool called Chatter that lets you use OpenAI, but I think Cole and I, with what we mentioned about Positron earlier, there'll probably be some nice extensions for that. All right, I'll put in the chat box the link to the Copilot on how to get that set up. All
yes.
right, so
And
Cole,
remember, I really want to highlight this. There's a couple of ways I think you could, take away from this. I think one of the easy ways to take away from this, I think there's probably people in the audience who are like, well, I mean, it's not like we did that much, right? Like, I mean, and you can't do that much in 30 minutes. But I think the key is what we're trying to show you is building blocks that you can then use and build something awesome with. And the idea is you bring the awesome to that equation, right? But these building blocks are really good tools. And somebody made a comment about, you know, can this be used with such and such model? And the thing I want to highlight is again, this is just using an interface, a structured interface that Open AI made popular. Any model that uses that interface, or any random API that somebody like me wrote that happens to use that interface, which is what this is. It's a random thing that I cooked up one night. Um, will work, right? You just swap out that URL and point it somewhere else. It's like, hey, this is my other API that is a front end. It's a wrapper around Bedrock or whatever other model you want to use. And so the idea is to identify these building blocks and then piece them together to build something really cool that makes an impact on your company, the world, whatever. Just you gotta bring the ideas though, because these are just like building blocks that you can then put together.
I think the where we'd point you next is that Joe and Winston gave some amazing talks at the Posit conference that we had a couple weeks ago. I don't know if those videos are made available yet, but I think the plan is to make them freely available on YouTube. And definitely watch those. I've been interacting with pharmas a lot the last couple weeks, and they have been starting to use those concepts and tools using Shiny for doing data analysis and also using Shiny to help you build Shiny apps. And so there's some really great talks. But hopefully today highlighted how you can get going creating Shiny for Python apps, and then also how you can use that in the space that you have around Gen AI and LLMs, which seems to be a popular topic. So I think we have about 2 or 3 minutes for questions. And if anybody Once I post those in the chat, I can ask those out loud for Cole and myself, and then we will pass it to the first speaker for today. Yeah, so somebody I think is asking about the cloud hosting. I know that the connect.posit.cloud is pretty much brand new, Cole. It's free, I think, right? There's a free tier, maybe some also. Do you know much about that yet?
I don't. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's free right now. Same thing with the where we were developing earlier. This has a free tier as well. It's hosted. The thing is, most of these services, um, you're using somebody else's computer, basically. If anybody's ever seen that sticker, there is no cloud, it's just somebody else's computer. So a lot of times they'll let you use their computer up to a point. When you start trying to train 1,000 models and that kind of stuff, they're like, hey, pony up, it's time to pay. So anyway,
And
so there's definitely a free tier.
I think
Connect
the
Cloud
key,
right now is free because it's alpha. And but yeah, that's the lots of good tools out there. Lots of things that you can download for free onto your desktop. You do want to be careful with hosted services because you don't want to rack up a big bill or anything. But
because I think the thing here, Cole, is like we wanted to, show you what it's like to publish, but most people inside their company are going to have strict controls around publishing and how they do that. So you probably want to like build these Shiny for Python apps in a managed space, and then you also have a publishing environment or platform that you use. But hopefully, this gives you an idea of how you can ship things off onto the web, whether it's internal or external. And somebody asked, Cole, how do I start the app after I created the .env?
yeah. So when you want to run the app, you have the .env file. There's this helpful little run button, and that is made possible via this Shiny extension. So if you don't have that extension installed, you want to install that, and it'll recognize that, hey, this is a Shiny app, and you can run it. But if you notice what happens here, it's just a Python command, right? Python -m Shiny run, and then there are a bunch of arguments. And so you're using Python to run the Shiny app, but the little run button makes it a lot easier. So that's the thing that I would recommend there. Tip, if you ever these buttons aren't showing up for you, you can um you can use the command palette, which is usually like Command Shift P, Control Shift P, something like that. And you can also do that directly from your command palette. So there's lots of good ways to invoke an extension like that.
And I've got two quick comments here. So someone asked about how secure is the private data? Because a lot of times the ideas with LLMs is working with your own PDFs, your own documents. And that's why Cole and I originally explored the local models, but some organizations now have relationships with the big tech companies where they're doing these types of things. So typically inside your company is where you're going to have a lot of this software in managed VPCs, virtual private clouds. So the security is just going to be inherited based on the IT team and how they set things up. And usually you just take Posit software there or wherever you're managing things in-house. So the next talk is starting. I think Cole and I can hang out while everybody transitions over. The talk that Cole and I gave at Fuse that sparked a lot of this and was originally the idea for the conference. The speaker is going to go now from Roche to talk about what Roche is doing internally to create chatbots to help people with programming. So I'd encourage you to leave this session and jump over to the next one where we will be kicking things off for the conference today. And thank you so much for coming. Hopefully this gave you some cool ideas on how you can use Shiny. And we will see you in October for Arendt Pharma coming up. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. See you later.